Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. Beginning back even to the whole sexuality thing. They had discussions about this in the 1930s, even the 1920s in fact, with the eugenic societies into the 30s, and how they could possibly bring down the population. It started long before that on the first world countries, to bring them down first before anybody else. Isn't that rather odd, you would think, huh? Because their birth rate wasn't skyrocketing like the third world countries. This wasn't happening. But they experimented in all the first world countries first. And H.G. Wells talked about it in the late 1800s, as he also preached about free love. That was part of the new socialist communist system they'd bring in. And yet people back then would never think of H.G. Wells as being a communist, because he worked for the elite, which tells you something else, doesn't it? That the whole idea of the big experiment of communism was the brainchild of those who already ruled the world, and they ruled capitalism. That's a fact. But yeah, H.G. Wells talked about it and free love, etc., etc. And he had some odd ideas himself, by the way, about that kind of area. But anyway, he was well padded, you might say, with the big societies behind him. And the Fabian Society, they had was funded by the Astor family. Actually, in today's terms, it would be multi-billionaires many times over. And they financed it, and they financed the so-called far left along the communist lines, which would suit them fine. With an ordered society, the capitalists can thrive like you wouldn't believe. Having a big machine, a layer of socialistic bureaucrats running and agencies running the people down below, minutely every part of their lives. And Charles Galton Darwin talked about it too in his book, The Next Million Years. Isn't it amazing too? Charles Darwin even talked about who are the best people to rule over Africa, and for the work, to get people to work harder and to get the most profit out of it. And he said, well, bring the Chinese, and it's all happening today. You think you're living through a stumbling down through time thing? No, you're not. It's all planned that way. Read your books. But again, there's nothing you can't do if you give sex the prime seat, you might say. I hate to use the term seat these days. On the throne to rule over the people. In the movie Idiocracy, it wasn't just a comedy. It was an awfully good comedy, by the way. And yet, even when they made it, they were always past a lot of things that were laughing at back then, because it was already introduced. And the whole premise of Idiocracy, of course, which you got to see, was eventually the people who had the higher qualifications wouldn't be breeding at all. They'd be postponing it to get higher jobs and more money, etc. And eventually the market was collapsed, and by that time they were too old to even breed. But down through time, everything went kaput, finished. The people lived in the future with broken, it's amazing, actually they showed you the broken bridges and so on. There's a scene in Idiocracy where when the guy wakes up in the future, it's an army experiment supposedly, and he didn't know where he was, or he thought he was going to be 10 years down the road, or maybe even 1 or 2 years. It was actually 500 years in the future. And he went into he stumbled into a hospital, and then he was trying to figure out where. He looked out the window, and you could see these flyovers, and the cars coming along them, and part of this flyover bridge was bust, and one car after the other was just dropping over the edge like it was normal. Nothing was getting repaired. And that was the future. Well, we're there. I'll even put up the articles to do with, it was that one with Florida there, where they put up a bridge over, I think it was a 6-lane highway. And it was rushed up fast in some super new construction method, blah, 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 blah. And there's a lot more to it, even right down to even, it was so politicized as who would design it, etc. Because nothing is straightforward anymore. And they have to politicize and say who's designed it, and you know where it all goes. But anyway, and they're pulling all that off the internet, and they have been doing that since this bridge fell down, I think 2 or 3 days after they put the thing up, and it killed people. And you look at this design, and you look at all the different, and you say, this is incredible, this design, it's just no sense at all. And other engineers across the world have looked at it and say, what on earth, how did this even get past? It defied all logic. And it also, supposedly, the other part, a big PR thing, never mind the cost of this thing, it got grants from the federal government, from the states, and from the whole bunch of other different departments to do with everything, you know. I don't even go there, but the fact is it did. The thing really shouldn't even have been, if it was a drawing, it should have been for a cartoon. Because in practicality, everybody agrees it was completely ridiculous. And what they did too, they put resin in to the concrete. Here's a new idea. Rather than use steel rebar, let's use resin ones, fiberglass instead. Okay. What flexes and what doesn't? Well, the concrete doesn't flex, okay. But the fiberglass might, okay. I'll put some links up tonight for those who don't know. And you watch this thing falling. They put stoplights underneath the bridge. And there were cars stopped there, waiting for a green light when the darn thing fell on them. It's so disgusting. But I thought that this is idiocracy. We're in an idiocracy. We're here. We really are here. Amongst all the fanfare of all the different people who, from the beginning, even in the university, in different departments and different other things in the department, who designed this thing. It's a big PR promotional thing. They were there from the very beginning, involved in the university to design this thing. I thought, oh my God, here we are. It reminded me too, today, looking over all the media today, with the perversions that are now lauded as normal all over the world. Getting worse, actually. I mean, I mentioned before about how free, we're so free we can strip off in public and what, well, guess what you do then, And this is now normal in different countries. At one time, you used to try and protect children from seeing stuff like that. Now they want to show the children this stuff and teach it in schools from the age of 5. Right would be wrong, wrong would be right. Everything would be turned upside down. And again, going back to the old biblical idea that they put in Revelation and other places too, in that old Bible. Because you see, things had been done before. And that's why the big boys know the techniques. What's worked in the past, like Plato said, you can reintroduce it again any time and the same formula and it'll work again. People will behave the same way if you introduce it properly. Like formats, you see. And it does. Fascinating. But yeah, I thought back to, Idiocracy, here we are. And everything in Idiocracy was to do with sex. Everything was chaotic, falling apart, nothing worked properly. Folk could hardly speak anymore to each other. They spent their time, as they called it, baiting, watching stuff on TV and doing certain things. They called it baiting. And they had all that, so they were free, but everyone was falling apart. And I thought that's where we are now. It really is, isn't it? And it's not a new idea. I mean, that was at the head of the World Revolutionary Party in the 1800s and onwards into communism. It was so bad. I mean, they had women brought in to the Bolshevik Party who would teach the first generation, that was the idea, and even set up departments on all things about sex and etc. And they wanted to eliminate marriage. That was initially what they wanted. But with even in Lenin's time, they had to change it completely opposite and fire all those people because the chaos was incredible. Nothing was working amongst people anymore. They couldn't even cooperate with male and female anymore. The children were all getting aborted. They knew they'd eventually run out of a crop if they didn't have breeding going on. And so they had to start to bring back marriage. And a lot of the revolutionaries left the party in the Soviet Union, the early Soviet Union, and came back across different countries in Europe. It's quite amazing to read it all and understand it. Well documented, though, who the different people were. And even as I've mentioned before, the well-known ones, even in Britain, some of them who were poets, were members of the Revolutionary Party too, and they talked about it too. And right up to H.G. Wells, that idea too. It wasn't his idea, this free love thing. No, that was part of the revolutionary movements of the time. And H.G. Wells at least knew that his benefactors, and those who he worked for, were multi-millionaires. This is in today's terms, multi-billionaires. So forget this whole idea of the workers this and the workers that. They've always been conned. They've always been fooled. And it's just amazing to me that all these, the top communists, even in Britain and elsewhere, often end up being millionaires themselves. None of them were ever working people. They all went through the universities and so on, often very privileged universities. I gave some articles last week about that too. They call it the blue blood revolutionaries or communists in Britain, who've got titles and so on. It's quite amazing, isn't it? How we're taught one thing, but the reality is a different thing altogether. It generally is, actually. But yeah, you've got to see Idiocracy. and see what you think of that. Now, I mentioned a few articles here just to tie in with maybe what I'm saying or not, I don't know, because I tend to prattle on. And by the way, they're even pulling my sites down. One of my sites has been pulled for the last couple of weeks, and can't even get in to see what's going on. Nothing was sent just to say why it was pulled or anything else. It was just done. But yeah, locked out of it. That's it. Now, back to what we're talking about here. An article here is called Curiouser and Curiouser, and it's from the UK column in Britain. See, there's phases you go through, and stages you go through. You go stage at one stage, get the people used to this one stage, then you can up the ante to the next stage, and so on. That's how simple the things are. Anyway, it says here that paedophile networks and the children's rights movement. It goes on about Peter Newell, I mentioned him before, who shares a name with the illustrator of Alice in Wonderland as a convicted paedophile. And this article should attempt to follow the Warren-like network of his connections to the children's rights movement. I gave talks now quite a few weeks back on this particular guy as well, and how he'd been caught way up at the United Nations and all the rest of it too, with all the accolades forever about how wonderful he is. He pled guilty on the 2nd January to 2 charges of serious sexual assault between May 1966 and May 1968. I guarantee you, when it comes down to 2 charges, they've been knocking them down, and knocking them down gets some kind of arrangement, obviously. And to 3 charges of indecent assault. I don't know what the difference is between May 1965 and May 1968. He was jailed for 6 years and 8 months. The case was reported in the mainstream press. Well, some of the mainstream press. And that's true, everything. It's just the reason how many folk are on board with this whole agenda, you know. And again, it's from United Nations too, and right down. It's not new either. There's quite a variety of headlines, although only the Daily Mail headline really gets at the significance of the case. This was not just another in a long and depressing line of paedophiles convicted decades after offending began. This was a key in the children's rights movement, and his work has shaped both the legislation and the culture currently arrayed against the traditional family. And then they go into a closer look into it all. They mention the different organizations, such as this one here, Children Are Unbeatable. That's an alliance of organizations and children seeking legal reform to give children the same protection under the law on assault as adults, and promoting positive non-violent discipline. And it goes on and on about Peter Newell and how he was interviewed in 2004 by Third Sector's John Plummer. And he even admitted during the thing that a lot of the things he was pushing, like banning children from being smacked and so on. He said, I find the subject deeply boring. This is the hero who gets all the accolades for his having his name at the top. But he himself said this in an interview. I find the subject deeply boring, he says. This is Peter Newell, who's the coordinator of the Children Are Unbeatable Alliance. There's no intellectual stimulation in it, he says. But having started the campaign, I can't stop now. So there's the kind of characters that get up there. And then you get this one here. The abusers behind the idea that children have a gender identity. It's an interesting article. And you can't tell me this thing much anymore, because you don't realize that the army that's out there of well-financed organizations and people to bring all this next step in to society. And it's quite easy to bring in actually now when you realize that a lot of the adults, I mean, look at, I mentioned Mardi Gras in Australia. It was a couple of weeks ago, and put the links up to the pictures. You got to see them. And they're having all these things all over the world. And then today in Australia, they got St. Patrick's Day. And you got to see this one too. They got women there with nothing on underneath, basically. This is the age. I mean, look at the age group. These are the ones now around about coming out of university, or in university age, including the ones who were on the beach in Florida too. They're within the amazing photographs too during the spring break. And look at all that stuff. That's the generation doing what they're doing, going through the motions on the beach that they saw being raised up. The first generation raised up with much music, television, and the videos. They're doing exactly where they were coached from childhood up to the present. It's interesting to study that and see it happening. It's quite amazing. And the exact motions you see on these videos, they're all emulating. Quite astonishing. On the beach. It works so well, doesn't it? But anyway, this article here also talks about Peter Newell, the second article here. He goes into what was up behind him too, and how they pushed the idea of gender identity. It's quite an old article. There's old articles here of the guys who really started this whole movement long ago. It's quite amazing how they do it. John William Money, his name is, 84-year-old, 2006, he died. And he's the guy who did sexual identity research, and he put out a lot of the bogus stuff to get it started. He wasn't the first guy to push all this, but he was the first, because you can go into even before, into the 1930s in Germany, and you'll find it in Berlin, when the guy there had a museum of sexuality, and he brought a lot down on his head, and other people's too. But anyway, William Money helped found the field of sexual identity studies. Psychologist, Johns Hopkins University, for over 50 years. In the 1950s, it was considered a case of sexual ambiguity. It's almost hermaphroditic is talking about. Yes, how they start things. Start it here, then move on to wherever you want. So you start it with the occasional hermaphrodite. They have the genitals of both in the one body. And often it doesn't work. One doesn't work, you know. And generally under, you know, it's not fully developed either. But anyway, it says here, he called oddities, glitches, the natural order, etc. He challenged assumptions, providing a systematic theory for understanding how sexual identity developed. And he argued that social and environmental cues interacted with a child's genes. And that's never changed. Before he came along, it was the old communist idea, when the early psychologists were going to promote social change in society by using psychology as a front, basically, to try and make folk think it was all legit. Anyway, so yeah, I was trying to say, is it nurture, basically, or nature? That's the whole thing you'll often hear. He was the first scientist to provide a language to describe the psychological dimensions of human sexual identity. He eventually came out with a study, supposedly, on one person who he claims there was sexual confusion in this child. So he advised that it be changed to one thing. I think it was a girl. I'm trying to find the actual article here. Yeah, it says, after consulting with Dr. Mooney in 1966, the parents of a young boy whose penis had been destroyed, and here you go, in a botched circumcision. And that happens too, by the way. Folk don't like to talk about this, you know. Decided to raise the son as a girl. In 1973, Dr. Money reported that the child who'd been castrated and furnished with dresses and dolls was doing well, and accepted the new identity as a girl. And that's how he made his name too, in the 70s. But it goes on, but in 1997, a report in the archives of the Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine, peer researchers provided a detailed follow-up of the boy who had repudiated his female identity at the age of 14, and even had surgery to reconstruct his genitals. The report caused an uproar. Dr. Money was criticized, I guess Money actually is a good name for me, in news reports and a book on the case. See how they lie, though. They lie to see how well they're doing. In 2004, the man they talked about, who'd been changed and then went back to male and all that, who had reclaimed his sex, committed suicide, which is pretty common too. And the family blamed the effort to change his sex. I prefer the gender into sex. And Dr. Mooney was mortified by the case, colleagues said, and as a rule did not discuss it. No, he wouldn't. He'd have put his whole theory out the window. How well they're doing, or this guy was doing and all that. And it goes on in this article. It's not bad, actually. It doesn't make any difference to society, and I'm not even talking about this to make... What I'm showing you is... All I'm showing you, really, is not to complain about. I'm just showing you what happens, and how everything that's happening was planned that way. And at the top, too, they want this kind of thing to be accepted, all kinds of changes, including sterilization, because to bring down the population of the whole planet, eventually. This is what they want, eventually. Also, this one here, too, on the Met Opera. Interesting here, in New York here. Met Opera fires longtime conductor James Levine, who's 74, for sexually abusing and harassing young male musicians. And listening to running mutual masturbation sessions with his students. Now, I know he was a conductor, but I mean, what, do you have to really do this just to get the timing of the orchestra working? I really don't know. I've never heard this type before. But I'm not kidding. You can't even imagine this, can you? I can. An investigation found evidence of his sexual abuse and harassment dating back to the 1960s, all that way back. Several men have come forward claiming that they suffered abuse from Levine while they were teenagers or his students. One account reveals that Levine asked several of his followers to wear blindfolds and mutually masturbate one another. So, I put this article up too, just to show you. But that's not new. All this stuff is promoted at the very top at United Nations as well. And then you get, I'll put it up to United Nations plan to teach masturbation to 5-year-olds. They actually talked about communal masturbation for schools. You'd all be in the classroom. Everything on this planet manages to breed without all these lessons. Do you really think it's what they tell you it's for? Do you really think that? Of course it's not. It's to promote different things and big changes. So lots of sex, but don't have offspring is the whole point of it all. Same with changing genders and just don't have children. That's the whole point of all. Then you get this article too. Remember that time Bill Clinton fired his Surgeon General? Remember that one? For encouraging masturbation education. Joycelyn Elders wanting to be taught in schools as well. Literally, they'd all do it in school in the class. That came out at the time. Put that up as well, 1994. It's quite amazing. All this stuff's out. I'll put some articles up on all of this. For those who care. I mean, to me, I just study it all as a big social study in human engineering, basically. All of it. Richard Dawkins suggests eating human flesh could overcome cannibalism taboo. That follows after Joycelyn Elders, who talked about people should just get over this abortion problem, like especially Catholics. Just get over it. And then Dawkins, another secular humanist, telling you just eating human flesh to overcome cannibalism taboo. So if you eat human meat, as they call it, it might just get you over it, just in the Independent newspaper. The benefits of lab-grown clean meat, he says. So if you eat lab-grown human meat, it might help you get used to the whole idea, Yeah. Anything you get their name in the papers, these characters. Because there's nothing else to tell you that's of any good at all. And also, too, in Australia, you have fences and turnstiles at Bondi Beach. The grim prediction for Australia call to cap migrant intake as population. This is the whole point. The population of the whole of Australia, the population, as intake population hurtles toward 25 million people. Oh, there you go. See, most folk over there live around the coast. The interior is like a cauldron, basically. So it's a big country, big continent. You live around where it's a bit cooler near the beaches, etc. So they want to cap immigration numbers. And it says that Melbourne and Sydney are struggling with the strain of migration. And as I say, that's an article there. Then look at the Australian version of St. Patrick's Day. It's just astonishing. Look at the pictures. Just like Idiocracy, as we go down the tubes. And we're managed so well, though, as we go down the tubes. You have as much sex as you want. Just don't have any offspring. There you go. Don't have any offspring. To me, it's just amazing. And I'll put up the one about the bridge too that fell, 950-ton pedestrian bridge. Isn't that terrible? The poor souls that got killed there. Poor souls. A bridge that honestly should never have been built. Not with that design. Just days after it was installed, this new revolutionary way of doing it all. And that's how things are done, But I'll put all these links up. There's lots on the sexual things. I say, isn't it amazing they always bring the same routines around as you're going down the tubes? Have as much sex as you want. It's, As I say, I don't do what I do because it's, when you change anybody, you might change a few individuals. That's all I even started with, to try and make people think for themselves. The ones who are capable of really and want to think for themselves. And they can maybe avoid pitfalls as they go through life, possibly for themselves. Because there's so much deception out there. And it's getting worse all the time with the things that are being promoted. And we're being dehumanized. And as we go along with being dehumanized, and even participate in it, with abortions and And everything else eventually will come in. Well, you've lived till you're 50 or 60. Why don't you just take this pill and die? That's been discussed already, by the way, believe it or not. And again, Australia's a guy who's always that gets on the tube in Australia, well connected, obviously, who keeps pushing this kind of stuff to get his name in the papers, but also as part of the agenda. Why don't you just work to a certain amount of time and then die? The ordered planned society, the Soviet system, which really took off in the West more so, I would say, than the Soviet Union, with all of its theories and implementations. Right down to the sexual revolution that the Soviets had to turn their backs on because it was destructive to the country, and had to come right back to copying the West. Well, the West then was going the opposite direction, as Bezmenov said, the defector. The cultural revolutionary system had worked so well in the West. He said that they were blown away. The Soviets were blown away when they came over and saw how well the destruction of the culture had worked, because it was planned. That's my little prattle for today. For those who want to know and who care to look into it, it's interesting. You might not have many people to share it with. You might not have people in your area who even want to hear it. You probably know that. And I see, but for yourself, it's good to know these things, how things really happen, why they happen, and right down to organizations and so on that are behind it all, for those who really need to know. And some people need to know these things. Many don't. But some people really need to know. It gets you sane if you're not sane before it. And once you are sane, it certainly keeps you sane. Think about it. And when you're in company, just live inside your head. Because you'll have to, as we go through a system now, which is analyzing everything you say, how you say it, because it's becoming ruthless and totalitarian as we go along. And free speech is definitely not to be encouraged or allowed for much longer in most countries. They're locking folk up in other countries already, in Europe, for trying to even use, not even against their laws, but just to voice their opinion on something, not even with anger, just to voice an opinion. It's not allowed in different areas. But you can have as much sex as you want. You can have all kinds of big special do's, and you can strip off all your clothes, and that's fine too. And they're pushing, of course, for what they call intergenerational sex, to get the children involved, etc., etc., etc. But just don't have offspring. Don't breed. Do everything else, but don't anything and everything, but don't breed. That's the message. And the big masters of the world, and we do have masters of the world, are showing through their paid henchmen and groups and organizations that they're now completely intolerant of any other opinion. So be careful out there. I used to say that on the Hill Street Blues, the big series on television. It was awfully popular. They introduced to the Western world, in fact, via a TV series, that you really needed SWAT teams everywhere in the streets and all over the place, blah, 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 to get us used to the whole ideas of it all. Because we're getting programmed all the time. But they used to always say there, during the briefing for the police, be careful out there, it's a jungle. For myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, this good night. May your God or your gods go with you.
If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
I find no entertainment in it anymore. Not when you've seen behind the veil. You know, it's all Brennan Circus, smoke and mirrors. It's hard to get into storylines, and because you know it's all bullshit. It's just all bullshit. Everything's bullshit, and you see the symbolism. You pick up on the underlying messages. and agendas being pushed, and then it just gets upsetting, and then you get fucking pissed. So I don't expose myself to that. Hi-yo.
I don't really know. I mean, as an awake person, when you can't reach out to people, I mean, what are you supposed to do, and how are we supposed to keep our hopes up? I mean, it's so depressing when you think of it.
Yeah, it is, because the conditioning on most people, when you see them and they can't look you in the eye or they think you're crazy, is because the condition has taken perfectly on them. And you're looking at conditioned robots, really. And they'll turn on you too. At the right time, they'll turn on you. But that's the perfect conditioning. The ones who are awake generally have always been awake, or they've known something was wrong. And they can't be conditioned quite the same way. But you're in amongst most people where the conditioning has worked perfectly. And that's the problem. I've always said the elite have a symbiosis amongst the masses of people, the general mass of people. Because the masses always look towards government to solve problems, even if it's a fake problem put out by the government. We immediately run to help us, save us, you know. There's only very few people in between, in the middle, who don't want to be stinking rich and rule everyone else's lives for them. And they don't want to belong to the general mob that just goes and watches all the porn on their internet all day long, or ball games or whatever. So it's a small group really who don't belong to either camp. That's a problem. Because as I say, the masses have a symbiotic relationship with the elite. And eventually when they get all their agendas through, the elite will turn around and say, we couldn't have done it without you, to the masses.
Yeah, and that's such a... I think it's disgusting. There's no other word for it. It's just utterly disgusting. Yeah?
It is, and it's very depressing until you realize that you might be surprised how many of those in between who are not brainwashed or conditioned and who don't seek personal power can still have a voice and start changing things around. And that's the only hope that we have, is to postpone it at least long enough. They'll either wither away, or they'll come out with an even heavier hand. But that's when even the masses start to see it and they know something's wrong, when the heavy hand of the monster comes upon them. And that's what it might take. Stall them long enough until timetables, according to those at the top, cannot be stalled. If you can stall their timetables, they get awfully angry and they start using force. Force is, at least the use of force, terrifies the public, and maybe even to waking up a little bit. And that's all we can really hope for. It's because it's too perfect. It's been here too long, this system.
But we cannot use violence and force.
No, they're so perfectly good at getting us to kill each other or fight each other. This has been their strategy for centuries, and it's a perfect art of how to get it all going. We can't use that at all. And by the same token, we have to make sure that the elites don't come out with a heavy hand and start using open force on the general public. Here's the thing too. They have been using force, or at least deadly intentions on the general public, because they know how they've been dumbing us down. They know when they rob your mind, it's the same as killing you. And when they inject things into you too that make the autism bloom, and it also makes everyone quite a few points lower in the IQ scale, makes us all sick so that we'll die off early, infertile, etc. They are physically, literally, this is a targeting, this is a murderous rampage has been going on for a long time under the usual covert actions of the United Nations that always deny what they're doing. One of the top players in this, who wrote about it, who taught Rhodes Scholars back in the 40s and 30s, internationalist again, who spoke, by the way, so he made a great speech in Sweden, was Toynbee. There were two Toynbees, father and son, and one took over from the other. But they literally taught the Rhodes Scholars for internationalism and to penetrate all governments and push them towards internationalism. He said, we always deny with our mouths what our hands are doing. And that's become the mantra for every organization within the United Nations. We always deny with our mouths what our hands are doing. And that's still their strategy today.
Respect the elderly, mother.
I miss my calling.